will be a panel about video distribution and content delivery. Where did all the traffic go? That's the question. Consumer internet video traffic will surpass 80% of global IP traffic by 2019, of which video on demand and high definition content constitute the bulk of the growth. This panel gathers leading media professionals to discuss the role of video content in their strategies, their best practices for content distribution, and their insights on consumer behavior and adoption. Let's welcome to the stage the moderator, Mr. Yousef Tuqan, VP of Marketing and Analytics at Careem, and his panel members to begin this discussion.
It's so nice to be back at ArabNet. It's really, really nice to see how this event gets bigger and better every year. And the screen definitely seems to get bigger and better every year. So there's two things I love about ArabNet. Well, there's many things, but the two things I love the most is one, the fact that this is another great example of a Middle Eastern startup kind of celebrating tech, celebrating creativity, and celebrating entrepreneurship. And the other bit is the fact that it feels like a family reunion. I get to hang out with all my friends for 2 days and call it work. And I'm very happy to have quite a few friends, new and old, on the panel today. From my left, I'm very happy to introduce Victor Ho, who's the Global Trade Marketing Manager at Dailymotion, Ian Manning, who's the head of agencies for MENA at Facebook, Waseem Afzal, who's the executive director for integrated solutions at OMD, and Rob Derderian, who's the director of sales for the video vertical at DMS. So as our speaker introduced, he said, the subject of our conversation today is where did all the traffic go? Video distribution and content delivery. I think there's a lot of things happening in this space. About 5 years ago, Cisco prophesied the coming of a perfect storm, where they said that everything analog was going to become digital and everything digital was going to become mobile. And probably no space has seen that the way advertising, and in a lot of ways video advertising, has seen that change. We're going from analog to worrying about digital to a complete fragmentation now, and the addition of video as well. And video presents a number of challenges, be it measurement, be it creativity, be it monetization, and there's a whole bunch of other topics in this space. So I'm very happy to have quite an esteemed panel and quite a broad range of our audience as well across the industry. So Waseem, you work at OMD, one of the largest media buyers and investors in the region. Set the stage for us. It seems to be getting harder and harder to keep up with the fragmentation of not just media or digital media, but now video on digital media as well. How's it going?
Yeah, thanks Yousef. Look, when you talk about the digital video landscape, we've come a long way over the last 2 to 3 years. When we first started talking about video neutral planning or looking at video holistically beyond TV, we had 1 or 2 options to play with, right? It was a lot more easier, and I think the only focus that we had at the time was to be able to understand how can we best look at video holistically and neutrally beyond TV and be able to drive efficiencies. And I think fast forward to 2016, it's a whole lot more complex now because we've got one too many choices from a platform perspective. Video is no longer just being consumed on desktops, so video is obviously now being consumed a lot more on mobile phones, tablets, and so on and so forth. And I think it's all about it leaves you with 2 challenges in a nutshell. One of which is how do you continue to look at video holistically and be able to look at digital alongside TV. So it's not just about centering your conversations around TV and looking at TV at digital as an afterthought. And the second point is, how do we continue to break the silos from one digital video platform onto another one? Because another fundamental change that is taking place is the phenomena of video across all of the social platforms. And from an agency point of view, I feel that the common currency across each of the social platforms, whether it is the likes of Facebook, Snapchat, Twitter, or Instagram, for that matter, I think it's all boiling down to video. And that's where the race is.
Yeah, video presents, some really interesting opportunities, and there is a lot of that fragmentation. Consumers have shifted to these new video formats. The publishers are all shifting to the new video formats. Ian, you work a lot with creative agencies, with a lot of the content creators who create a lot of the advertising that kind of powers all this. Are agencies keeping pace in the region?
Yeah, it's a great question, Yousef. I think it's fair to say it's actually not as complicated as it might sound, and maybe I can help you out a little bit here. The reality is that people are spending as much as 3 hours a day on mobile devices. And a lot of that time is spent, yeah, sure, it's on video, but it's actually in a limited number of apps. We know, I saw a stat just the other day, that somewhere around 80% of people's app time on mobile phone is actually in 3 apps. So it's actually relatively condensed within the mobile industry as a start. But I think the time spent on video is the interesting bit, and that's where I think it does get a little bit more complicated. So we know that video is obviously exploding. We know that certainly people are watching and enjoying a lot more video on many different platforms, but particularly in mobile. And we know that as much as 25% of mobile time will be video within the next couple of years. So we really need to understand what's happening in the video space. And I think that's where mobile video specifically differs from video on other platforms. We know that people consume shorter portions of video on mobile devices because of the way that they use mobile devices. But we also know that they're able to actually recall and understand messaging in much shorter time frame as well. So this leads us to understand that the 30-second TV spot, although will potentially work on video, on mobile video, isn't necessarily the right starting point for creative agencies. And I think that's where the barrier comes from. Is that creative agencies' business models are really built around longer format. By longer, I mean 30 and 30 plus. And they haven't really shifted quickly enough to understand that you need to make more snackable content, shorter version content that consumers can engage with in a shorter space of time. And if they engage with that in the short space of time, then maybe drag them through the longer messaging. So bring the messaging into shorter time frames and make it interesting and relevant enough for people that they want to watch longer than the first 10 seconds or whatever it might be.
It's quite interesting, isn't it? Because instinctively with advertising, you always kind of reveal the logo at the end. You kind of give away what's this wonderful brand that's telling us this story. Where with Facebook, you've actually turned that on its head because people seem to be living in the stream. The feedback to us as advertisers now say, actually, show the logo in the first 3 seconds.
I think that's a simplistic interpretation of it, is to show the logo, but it's about making sure that the brand message is in the first couple of seconds. It doesn't mean you have to show the logo. I mean, I think there can still be some creativity involved as well. It's about making sure it's relevant, and a lot of that's about targeting, making sure you're reaching the right people with the right message in a way that is interesting enough that they'll want to engage with the content. Yeah. Which is the same as any other medium in reality, just your time frame for success is so much shorter on a mobile device.
Rob, you've worked in this space a long time, and now with DMS, you work across multiple publishers, multiple formats, multiple platforms. What's your advice to people who want to advertise in this space? How should they be planning their campaigns? How should they be driving their strategy around how to reach consumers with so much choice and so much fragmentation today?
So that's a great question too, and it's something I think about every day. I'm going to talk about it in 2 ways. One would be kind of flighted versus more episodic planning, and then 2 would be in terms of the inventory that we're looking at. First, I'll draw on my experience. I started my career working in direct response for Google. So what we saw at that time, and this was going back 10 years, was brands, retailers that were very direct response heavy that would occasionally layer in brand message on non-brand keywords around key drive times or product launches or things like that. And I'm starting to see a similar trend when I look at how people are planning out video. So brands will do very flighted, very short-form video bursts within the networks, and then they'll starting to really just test the waters with direct response video. Well, what we're advising is kind of a more persistent message for the brand that then will culminate in a really specific DR message when the time is right. And I'll give an example of that with some research that we've done at DMS around Ramadan. This is my first Ramadan, so it's all new to me. But what I do know is that the auto dealers are very heavy promotionally during this time. So what we've seen is that out of the 100% of people that are intending to buy cars in a given year, 95% of them that intend to buy have a 3-month sales cycle with 2 to 3 brands that they're considering, independent of time or promotion. So then with the people that are specifically looking to buy within Ramadan, you're really only looking at 5% that are looking for that promo messaging. And out of that 5%, 66% of them are looking for the best deal possible. So if half of your budget is geared towards really direct response focused advertising in that particular time, I'd question how effective that is. And in fact, it might be hurtful with people that are looking to you specifically for your brand message over the course of the year, and they're going to buy your brand no matter what, whether or not you have the lowest price. So what we recommend is kind of, like I said, a more persistent, always-on brand message that has the opportunity to reach not just your entire target audience, but go beyond your target audience and help you really fill your sales funnel with more episodic direct response advertising and drive time, with a separate but parallel plan that's targeting maybe those lower funnel bargain shoppers over the course of the year that maybe wouldn't buy you if you weren't priced, but making sure you segment that audience so you don't dirty the pool.
And how does technology enable that? I mean, how are you able to kind of plan that user cycle? Is, kind of being able to track users, serve different advertising at different stages, or based on past behavior within those platforms?
So at DMS, I think we're in a unique position to do that. We represent over 40 publishers, and on top of having really different kinds of video content, from kind of the most upper funnel premium content with Shahid, through digital natives and a lot of kind of made for the web internet, and then now working with Dailymotion, we really have the full cycle of UGC up through premium content. And when you layer on top of that our DMP, which analyzes, I think at last count, 30 billion data points across 60 million unique users in the market, we can really start to learn what people are responding to so that we can sequentially market to people that are responding to your message and help pull them through the sales funnel over time.
Okay, cool. Well, if we talk a bit about Dailymotion, I mean, Victor, let's talk about monetization. Within advertising, everybody said when the money went from analog to digital, the dollars turned into dimes. And then when the money went from digital to mobile, the dimes turned into pennies. And it's becoming, obviously, there's a lot more time being spent on mobile, a lot more time on video, but it's harder and harder to monetize that with more traditional ways. So from your perspective as a leading publisher, I mean, how do you see publishers successfully monetizing video?
Well, in order to fully understand how we monetize video, I think it's important to understand what we do with our audience, because our goal is actually to bring premium video content to our global audience. And we achieve that by partnering up with leading global publishers. We have a strong network of publishers that post videos on a daily basis on Dailymotion. Well, it's basically on Dailymotion you have 300 million unique viewers per month, more than 3 billion video views per month, and monetizing that can be quite tricky. So we do programmatic, we do direct sales, but I think the added value that we bring and what advertisers should be excited for are the creative opportunities that we offer, because we have a integrated creative studio, and you have that plus the network of publishers. So the opportunities there are plenty of opportunities, and this is the key advantage for us to monetize even more our platform. So we strongly believe that there are two ways to create content for brands that creates some resonance for the audience. So we have a video player that we master, and we can do anything we want with it. We can integrate interactivity, build engagement with the audience through that, and we'd like to add on top of that an influencers, publishers, content creators, in order to hyper distribute that content.
Okay. Yeah. And how do you strike that balance between wanting to create monetization opportunities and more and more elaborate advertising solutions versus the consumer desire, which is like, I just want to get on with this. I don't want to have to watch this. How do you strike that balance between adding value to the advertiser experience, but also adding value to the consumer experience?
Well, I think you have to differentiate the two types of messaging. You have like the standard media with pre-rolls, in-stream, we all know about that, and sometimes it can be quite intrusive. But if you use that media in a way that promotes exclusive new branded content, like you use a teaser inside your pre-roll, this can actually triggers and drive traffic to your actual branded content. And we did something because we are specialized in live broadcasting, and for an advertiser in Europe, we integrated the live feed directly inside the pre-roll. So people were, okay, sorry, thank you. So we integrated the live feed, the live stream directly inside the pre-roll, and people were actually taken aback by that, and they clicked and they went to the live stream.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Ian, I mean, you must have a perspective as Facebook in terms of how you strike that balance between advertising and intrusiveness.
I was kind of hoping you would ask me that, because I was just thinking I'd like to add to that. I think the reality is, I need to move this closer to me as well. I think the reality is it's about what's relevant to the consumer. Consumers don't want messages that are irrelevant to them. It's as simple as that. So making sure that the message that we place in front of consumers has a utility, whether that's a utility in terms of information, entertainment, engagement, whatever it might be, but some sort of utility to that consumer, then they will actually watch through that. And we see, within the Facebook platform, obviously your opportunity to skip past advertising is kind of easy, actually, as it is in many, whether in print you can just turn the page, or on television you could change channel or look at something else while you're doing it as well. So it's quite easy to skip advertising if you choose to, but if you make the advertising targeted to that individual, so use the data that you have available to ensure that firstly you're targeting the right people, but then also use the data you have available to come up with the right kind of creative messaging to target that information, then I think it is actually relatively effective. So the X-out rates on something like Facebook are actually relatively low. So because of the targeting capabilities and because of the way advertisers are using the platform to ensure that the creative is relevant, people actually don't skip past the advertising as much as you would think that they could. So having a choice as to whether you want to watch it or not want to watch it also has a very positive effect on the quality of the messaging that consumer receives.
Okay, when we talk about video, there's a lot more than just kind of analog, kind of shorter and shorter clips. There's obviously a lot of new formats, and I'm happy to ask you about it, but really open up to everybody else. You look at somebody like Facebook, you've been doing Facebook Live, you've been doing 360, obviously made a very big bet on Oculus Rift. Are these passing fads, or do you really see this as the future of entertainment?
No, look, I think we've seen a definite shift over the time of Facebook from obviously text-based communication. So you probably don't remember this, but when first Facebook and other social networks became available to you, you would send status updates and you'd write a little note, hey, I'm at ArabNet today, or whatever it might be. So we've seen that shift very quickly into photographic updates, and maybe many of you have done that today, where you literally take a photo of where you are and you post that rather than actually writing text. So we see that both within the Messenger platform, where things like emojis have become a very popular way of communicating. So people have shifted into a visual way of communicating fairly seamlessly, and it kind of makes sense, because if you think about it, that's really where communications originally started. Cavemen tended to paint on the walls pictures rather than long pieces of prose. So picture-based communications has always been a very effective way of communicating, and we've seen that shift happen. Now what we're seeing is technology is allowing us to do very easy and very simple video-based communication. So we see this very much as not a passing fad, but as in the way that people want to communicate through sight and motion.
Okay.
So the shift to video is very clear, and we've seen, as I say, probably 25% of mobile will be video within the next couple of years. That's already happened. About 60% of the Facebook platform are actually consuming video within MENA today on a daily basis on the platform. So a significant number of people engaging in video. But where does it go to next, I think, is the root of your question, around virtual reality, Oculus. Everyone wants to talk about Oculus. And we see that as a bet on the future. Long way to go in terms of the technology, but obviously people are shifting towards a much more immersive video experience. Already you can see that with the use of, for example, 360 video, which we see on our platform and others. So people are shifting towards this because the technology makes it available. It gives you a much more immersive experience. It gives you a way of really getting a sense of where this person is and what they're sharing from a sharing point of view, but equally from a brand point of view, it's a really fundamentally more engaging way to communicate. So I think the shift to 360 as 360-degree cameras, or the opportunity to stitch together pictures, becomes more readily available will definitely be something we see within the next year or so. But the shift to much more virtual reality experiences really requires a lot more technology behind that. So at the moment, yes, you can get goggles, but none of us are sitting wearing our goggles here today. No. So that becomes very much a gaming application at this present moment. But we absolutely believe that people will communicate like that in the future.
Interesting. Rob, what else are you seeing on your horizon in terms of other video formats, be it vertical video or other interesting expressions of video content?
So I'd actually defer to Victor to talk about vertical video, because it's something we're going to be bringing to Dailymotion. But to add on to what I see as being interesting and not necessarily new, but really expanding, is in addition to video, being able to provide, we always talk about sight, sound, and motion, but the addition of choice. So we've been running some pre-roll units more recently in market that give the user the choice with how they want to engage in the ad. So I think YouTube obviously started this with the ability just to skip the ad. This is not an ad that I want to see right now. But we're doing some interesting things now within a pre-roll, letting the user choose their experience. So do they want to watch one of two videos, or do they want to be able to scroll through a product line, or do they want to click out of it and go directly to a website? So I think keeping an open mind and listening to what the user is looking to experience, in addition to providing them a lot of the new things that Ian was talking about, I think is a way for us as publishers and as advertisers to provide more value to the consumer while also driving more value in terms of data with what's working and more engagement overall.
Waseem, let's talk a bit about measurement, because ultimately, the key advantage of digital has always been the fact that everything is so infinitely measurable. With video, with multiple platforms, multiple publishers, multiple standards, it must be creating a lot of challenges for you to be able to kind of measure consistently the ROI on what you're spending from one video channel to the other.
Absolutely. I think before we talk about a need for us to look at measurement consistently across platforms, I think it also starts off with the opportunities that we have across multiple platforms. And one of the challenges that we face is that when you talk about different distribution platforms, I'm not even talking about the social platforms, you've got one too many choices to make from. And you're basically vying for a share of dollars for us to be able to distribute them efficiently across platforms. So it starts off with the opportunities and the need for us to best standardize the opportunities across those platforms. And when we talk about ROI and understanding the effectiveness of these activities across digital platforms, for us it really boils down to 4 things. What are these 4 things? First things first, it's about understanding brand lift. So the activities that we have done across these platforms, what effect do they have on consumer purchase decision signals, whether it is to do with likability, favorability, or purchase intent. The second one is about engagement. I think when we first started talking about digital video distribution, a lot of the focus was placed on chasing numbers, right? Absolute viewership numbers. And I think this is where maturity has kicked in across advertisers as well as agencies, and even from a publisher point of view, to understand the impact, right? Amount of time spent with video assets, the shareability numbers across those content, the watch rates, and so on and so forth. So that's extremely important for us to understand engagement, because we know that each of the platforms have different areas of strengths and they work differently. The third thing that we look at, obviously, is reach and frequency, to be able to understand how are we able to maximize reach, whether through direct IOs or using technology such as programmatic, automating our buys to be able to maximize across specific audience segments. And last but not the least, which is a pretty hot topic for us at this point in time, is understanding viewability of our video activities, whether it was an in-stream ad above the fold, whether actually people saw this, and so on and so forth. So for us, if you look at these 4 areas of performance and be able to create a linkage back to what impact it had on the bottom line from a business growth perspective, that's it, right? You don't really need to complicate this beyond this.
I mean, Victor, what's your perspective from, obviously you're based in Europe, you work for a global publisher. What's your perspective on measurement, and where do you think it's going?
Well, I agree with what Waseem just said. The main thing, the most important thing for advertisers and brands is to identify their exact goal and their strategy. Because in Europe and other markets, there has been some attempts at creating a KPI that would be standardized and would allow advertisers to compare campaigns across the devices. And it's the example of GRP. Well, GRP is a traditional TV KPI, and some advertisers have been pushing for a comparable KPI for internet video. And that standardized KPI for internet would take into account 2 concepts, which are viewability, of course, and on-target impressions, on-target audience delivery. And from my experience at Dailymotion, I've noticed that those 2 components have some limits today, especially in terms of third-party measurers that testify that. For example, for viewability, you have mode, you have integral ad science, you have everything you want. And there has been some discrepancies for the same campaign measured by 2 third parties. And in terms of on-target impressions, we all know that publishers have different levels of data targeting, and when we talk about on-target impressions, it means social demo impressions. And when you look at market averages in terms of on-target delivery, they are still relatively low. I believe in almost all markets, the highest on-target average is 50% on the ensemble 25 to 49, something like that. And so what do? There's only 50% of the average internet impressions that are actually delivered on target. And the rest, what do you do with that? Do you just trash it? And the fact that on-target impressions by nature is defined only based on social demo criteria is a limit in itself, because you don't look at the interest of people that have been exposed to your ad. And I believe that internet video is at its teenage years. Mm-hmm. We're still trying to identify what works best for video. And but one thing we know is that internet video with interactivity, with all the enhancements that you can bring to that, does for sure provide the info of interest, engagement, and so on. Okay. So we should definitely look at other KPIs than just social demo.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit to that. I think I often say, I wonder what would happen if we had no measurement. What would you want to measure? And I'm not convinced that people would come up with things like likes, shares, impressions, maybe not even reach, actually, in reality. If we had a clean slate, what is the one thing that we'd want to know about? And it's really about brand value. It's like, how can this piece of communication or this campaign actually drive brand value in order to drive more sales or more valuable sales for a brand? And that's really what we should therefore be measuring. I think the digital industry has fallen into a kind of trap of, because we have it, let's measure it. And this is where I think the debates around impressions, and in our case, likes and shares, I mean, frankly, so what? It's really about what brand value can we generate from this activity. That's really what we should be focused on trying to fix.
And if I could add into that from the publisher side, I've been reading that BuzzFeed, when they made the move from being a kind of a site-driven, traffic-driven business to being a distributed network, to a point now where I believe 5% of their views happen on site and 95% happen off-site. They really had to re-anchor what they were going to measure. So it went from website traffic and unique users to media views across the board. And I think a rubric that we used to use when measuring social media to kind of keep things simple would be 3 things that I think about. Conversation rate, so what percentage of people that see your video are commenting on it. Applause rate, what percentage of people that see your video are liking it or hearting it or whatever the appropriate emotion would be.
Hearting it, I like that.
Is that new? And then amplification rate, how many people are sharing it. So if you think about it that way, and if you use those as kind of gut checks for the video you're producing, you're providing more value to the consumer, and you can kind of overlay that to on the purchase funnel and think of it as more of an engagement funnel. So at a high level, brand awareness, will I watch it? Yes. Taking it down through consideration. Is this worth talking about? Yes. Is this worth liking? Yes. Is this worth sharing? Yes. And then finally, where do I buy this thing? So if you think about your video strategy that way, you're always providing value and moving the consumer in the right direction.
May I comment on that? Yeah, I think it's an interesting way to look at it. And I think trying to find a surrogate measure for the level of interest a consumer has in a piece of content is very interesting. But what we found is that there's actually quite small correlation, or in fact no correlation, between likes, shares, and purchases. And in most instances, brands are looking to get some sort of consumer reaction that drives business rather than consumer reaction of I like the piece of content. That's very much about the content rather than about actually driving the business for that brand or that client. So I think we've got to be careful of seeing it as sort of an internal measure of success of a piece of content, and think much more about what's right for the brand or for that client. So we would tend not to recommend that people look at things like likes and shares as a metric.
I'd agree as a whole. I think in terms of a continuity of your messaging,
to measure a piece of content, sure, but not to measure the value of a campaign.
Okay.
If I may chip in, my perspective from an agency point of view is, I think a lot of this is superficial for us, because we need to look at the performance of video, whether it is on TV, on mobile, desktops, on any of the platforms, in correlation to what does it do for the business, right? Because I know that Facebook are moving into a completely different direction in terms of optimization of video investments across segments that have the highest, likelihood for recall and purchase intent, versus some of the other platforms that we see. I think, but this is where we need to educate, and it's a collective responsibility as an industry for us to understand what matters the most to our clients, right? What actually drives the business forward? Is it just shares, views, content? Because for us, a lot of these things should be considered as constants in terms of quality of content that we are producing. What should be the average length of a piece of content that we are producing for YouTube versus Facebook versus Dailymotion? So I think a lot of these things should somehow kind of be put into a framework of best practice from an operational point of view, and we should change the focus from a measurement point of view onto what does it mean for a client's business.
Well, just to kind of follow on to that, I mean, I think there's a lot of kind of foundational aspects of our industry that are being disrupted, be it measurement, monetization, everything else. I want to talk a little bit about alternate content providers, people like the MCNs and so on, because to me, it seems like they're doing quite an interesting thing where, these are, not only are they, very powerful content creators, but they're also working directly with advertisers, and they have these huge, very highly engaged audiences of tens of millions of people sometimes who have actively opted in to subscribe or like or want to watch their content. What's the implication for, Kharabish and U-Turn and Maker Studios and these people in these places who can not only create your content but also create your advertising and then give you an audience on demand as well?
Yeah, it's a good problem to have in the region, right? Because if you go back to 2012, 2013, the one problem that we talked about across all of the events, and forums such as this was lack of original, Arabic content.
Yeah, right.
So it's a good problem to have, and I understand how those guys are now, competing for the same share of dollar as a distribution platform. So from our perspective, we are actually looking at content creators as a distribution vehicle and not just as a means for us to produce content. And they've completely changed the landscape because now you know that when you work with platforms, there's obviously a standard template of opportunities, but when you take the conversation further up with these content creators, there's a whole lot of opportunities for us to natively integrate our brand experiences into content. And when this content becomes extremely contextualized for the needs of the region, I think that's where magic is done because we know that the content that YouTube, U-Turn is producing in Saudi Arabia or Kharabish for the rest of the region is a lot more powerful because it's content produced by people, for people who understand what the needs are and what the gaps are.
But I think no conversation around video, especially video in the Middle East, would be complete without a conversation about Snapchat. There was a great photograph on the cover of Bloomberg Business Week a few weeks ago, and it was called the new thing. And it kind of showed you how you had, Twitter was the new thing, and then Facebook was the new thing, then Google was the new thing, then it was Tumblr, then it was Instagram, and it kind of ends with a picture of DJ Khaled taking a massive selfie with Snapchat next to him. And, what we see, even with our own behavior as individuals, but also in terms of consumer behavior, the rise of Snapchat and the incredible immediacy of it and what it does has really been quite transformational. I don't know how much of that's translated into the advertising space yet. Any thoughts from anybody around the rise of Snapchat and what the commercial implications are of it?
Yeah, when you talk about consumption, right, nobody has access to quantifiable data, but according to our own estimates, we believe that up to 30% of the millennials are active users of Snapchat in the GCC region. So we know that consumption is quite strong and it's one of the fastest growing social platforms in the region. When you talk about opportunities for advertisers, there's a lot of appetite amongst our clients to be able to tap into the platform, and we have been able to validate that through a few research studies that we have commissioned, whereby we've understood the impact of a platform such as Snapchat on purchase intent for clients like LVMH, right? And in terms of, so we've seen that the platform caters to audiences that have a lot of affinity with the clients. And I think you don't have too many opportunities to play with the platforms. The only way for you to navigate the platform is a need for us to work through the influencers and the content creators who are pretty active on the platform.
Okay, cool. Well, I know we've got to wrap it up. We've only got a few minutes left, so I maybe just would like to ask the four of you, maybe starting with you, Rob. You've been here 9 months now. Like you said, it's going to be your first summer, your first Ramadan. Fast forward to ArabNet 2017. We're all back on the stage, if they'll have me back. And we're all here talking again about video. What do you think the headlines are going to be a year from now? What fundamental changes or evolutions do you think we're going to see in the next year?
I think it's going to be real-time responses to an audience with video, and we're starting to see it already now. A lot of our publishers are doing some interesting things with Facebook Live, where they're responding in real time to the cues given by their audience and producing content almost in real time. So I'm interested to see where that evolves in terms of reaction to current events, reaction to sporting events or the Olympics or things like that, or politics, to the fact where as we're sitting around our living room talking about what we're seeing on TV, we have real-time response and riffs on these topics online. Cool.
Waseem, you've worked in this space for so long now here in the region. What do you think we're going to see in the next year?
I think starting off with investments, I forecast that more amount of investments will move from the long-tail TV channels onto digital video platforms. Two is the influx of distribution platforms, whether small or big. I think the conversations will center around quality of content that each of these platforms are pushing forward. And three is, I think, when you talk about the emergence of Snapchat and live Facebook streaming, I think marketing will become a lot more live in terms of the need for us to be nimble and really push things out in that moment. So, marketing for the screen and marketing in that moment will become a lot more prominent for us in the next 12 months.
Cool. Ian, any other perspectives on it?
Yeah, I'd hate to be the person going last here. I think we're all saying much the same thing here. I think from an advertising point of view, I think we'll get to a point where advertisers are creating specifically for mobile around video content. So I think that'll be a real step forward in terms of the advertising side of it. And then I think live is game changing. I think that Facebook Live, just because of its sheer volume and access, will change the way that both consumers and brands think about video on mobile devices.
Okay, cool.
I think that next year content will be even more front and center. And will include all the interactivity, the live features, VR, everything like that. And advertisers will go more in depth with the interest of people, more than just social demographics.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So I think really what we can conclude from this is that the speed of change is pretty incredible, and the need for publishers to adapt, for advertisers to adapt, for agencies to adapt, to being able to market the moment, to being able to measure, to being able to react to consumer behaviors and needs is only going to get more sharp and more acute as we go forward. So I think it's a really exciting space, and I think it's a wonderful conversion of monetization, advertising, creativity, and technology. And I think there's going to be a lot of great things happening in this space, especially in the Middle East, where we see so much great video content. So please help me thank our panelists, and enjoy your lunch. All right. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.